Oh dear. Looks like we might have a little bit of a winter surprise over here at the Dr. Plague home. I hope you're settled in because the wind is suddenly rattling the rafters and the fire is feeling like a must-have. Welcome to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you some more great stories to get you through this chilly, snowy day. Here on the channel, we're no strangers to doing a little bit of streaming. However, I don't believe I've ever done anything as risky as what these streamers are about to do. So let's hear about 4 friends and their stream, and let's hope it doesn't get too dicey when they put on a killer stream. There were 4 of us when we broke into the Megaplex. There was Ralph, better known as Razorgore on YouTube, and Dale, better known as Drakesong. The 2 of them often do head-to-head videos on YouTube, as well as Let's Plays and other game content where they played the latest video games and titles. Jeremy, Kyle, and I were just the editing team, but we appeared on the channel often enough to be recognized. I was operating the camera that night as we came up to the back door of the Megaplex, ducking under the police tape. "What's up, Gorehounds? Tonight we have something special for you," Ralph said, trying to keep his voice pitched low and failing. "As some of you may know, the Megaplex in our area was recently closed under some pretty creepy circumstances." Ralph pulled a goofy-looking face that was probably supposed to be creepy as he looked into the camera. Dale tried to stay in the shot, looking unimpressed and striving for that too cool for this look. Kyle and Jeremy stood outside the camera, Jeremy waiting for his cue and Kyle looking around nervously. Ralph had talked us into this, and all of us were having second thoughts now that we were here. The payoff would be spectacular, but the risks would definitely be high. "For those of you who don't know," Dale said, "last week an unknown man came in for the midnight showing of Silence of the Lambs and killed 8 patrons in the theater. Many of the others escaped, but when the cops burst in, he was nowhere to be found. The theater has been closed for 2 weeks now, with no sign of the murderer, so we figured it's the perfect place to break into and play some Dead by Daylight, maybe some Friday the 13th, as we all sit in the creepy theater, isolated in the darkness." We kept saying break-in because it sounded more dramatic. In reality, Jeremy worked for the Megaplex as an assistant manager, and he had keys. I kept the camera on Ralph and Dale as Jeremy approached the employee entrance with the crowbar, so the camera could easily see him as he passed. After some grunting and exertion off-screen, while Ralph and Dale hyped up the stream, Jeremy slid the key into the lock and unlocked it with one quick, smooth twist. He gave a mighty strain and pretended to wrench the door open as he turned the handle. I turned to look at the door as it came flying open, and the 2 congratulated him as we proceeded into the dark back room of the Megaplex. I had all 4 of our laptops in a bag around my back, and I tried not to bump them together as we walked inside. I would sit in the booth and monitor the stream, collecting the video and audio from the other sessions, and piece them together into something cool that we could post on our channels next week. The creepy ambience and gameplay would play well together. It would ensure that we had something awesome for maximum viewership. I could also monitor them from the central projection hub in case something went wrong. The theater was dark, the emergency exit signs glaring garishly at us as we walked through the snack bar and into the common area. The Megaplex had 12 different theaters and would allow each of us to sit in a different one without even having to leave our fingerprints in the theater that was also a crime scene. We had toyed with the idea of having all of them sit in there, basking in the atmosphere of death as they played killers and victims. But the idea of accidentally leaving evidence behind to incriminate ourselves was particularly unappealing. We were already taking a huge risk by doing this. Mitigating risk from herein was important. "Okay, we're going to set up now," Ralph said to the camera as he stood near the entrance to the theater hallway. "See you on the other side, Gorehounds," he intoned. I switched off the camera and put down the bag as I handed out the controllers. "Okay, here's your controllers. Take any theater but 7. Jeremy, show me which one of these keys gets me in the booth again." Jeremy flipped through them until he found a longish silver one, handing it to me. "This one, and the one next to it'll get you into the projection cage. You know what you're doing up there, right?" he asked for the 1,000th time. "Hook the HDMI cables from the laptop to the projector. It's not rocket surgery, dude." "Please, for the love of God, don't unhook anything that's already hooked up to the projectors. Playing a pretty dangerous game here already, and I don't want anyone questioning why there are suddenly wires unplugged." "I think I can handle it, Jeremy. Now you guys go and get set up so we can get started." They went towards the theater, and I went towards the projection booth. 30 minutes later, we were ready to start streaming. The software on each laptop was easy to set up, and hooking the computers to the projector was easy. Each of their audio feeds let me hear what they were saying, and let them communicate with each other through the game software. They had taken theaters 5, 6, 8, and 9, leaving theater 7 empty between them. I couldn't help but glance down into the dark theater as I worked, my eyes straying to it ever so often. The lurid red exit signs were the only light in theater 7, casting the police tape and seats in an eerie crimson glow. I cut the screens on for 5, 6, 8, and 9, seeing the theaters light up as the screens flickered to life. When the screen for 7 came on too, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced out the little window that gave me a bird's eye view of the theater, and nearly dropped the laptop I'd been about to move. From my vantage point, I had a great view of the large black shape standing frozen in front of the screen. I backed away shakily, startled by the sudden appearance of the gangly shape, and bumped into the desk as I stumbled away from the frightening sight. I stood, breathing hard, as my mind raced and my brain ran over 1,000 different scenarios. Was it the killer? A cop doing some late-night investigation? A janitor? They weren't moving, so I had probably startled them as bad as they'd startled me. What if it was the killer? They had said they'd never left, hadn't they? My mind kept plodding over that little nugget as I stood motionless and felt my guts writhing in terror. I needed to get the audio feeds hooked up so I could warn them. I needed to call their cell phones so they could run. I needed to do something other than just stand here in abject terror. But that seemed to be all I was capable of doing. When he continued to stand motionless, however, I felt my fear ebb some and took another look. I realized my mistake pretty quick. The coat had clearly been left over a chair or something. The longer I looked at it, the more details became apparent, and the stranger it became that I couldn't see the arms or legs sticking out of it. I laughed when I realized I was frozen in fear by someone's leftover coat, and chalked it up to the creepy ambience of this abandoned theater. I was too jumpy. I had to keep my head in the game. I got back to work. "Mic 1, check," I asked, sitting down and testing the setup. "Check," said Ralph. I saw a little light come on in the seating area as his controller came on. "Mic 2, check." "Check," said Dale. "Mic 3, check." Nothing. "Mic 3, check," I asked, looking out into Theater 8. I didn't see anyone sitting in the dark rows of seats and started glancing around to see where Jeremy was. The screen was a solid, staticky white that covered the whole theater in a bright carpet of light. By that light, I could see nothing but an empty theater. This inevitably led my eyes over to Theater 7, and I had to double-take when I noticed something was amiss. I stood up, squinting at the chair someone had left on the little platform in front of the screen. The chair was bare now, just a silhouette behind the white screen. The coat was gone. "Sorry, Mic 3 here. I had to go to the bathroom." The coat had been there. I knew I had seen it. The ragged old coat had been sitting on a chair in front of the screen, a chair that was now empty. The hood had been up, making me think that someone had been inside it, the arms dangling out like empty scarecrows, and now it was just gone. The theater was still empty. I could see it illuminated by the screen, but the coat had vanished. "Hey, are you there? Control, come back." I shook it off and went back to my setup. "Check. Mic 4, check." "Check and check," Kyle said. I got back to the job at hand. I'd ponder that old coat and its escape act later. I would ponder that old coat a lot more than that in the coming days. I lined up their cameras so their fans could see and hear them, and then we officially started the stream. Our last stream, as it happens. "What's up, Gorehounds? I'm joined by Drake Song from channel Dragonhorn, as well as Kyle and Jeremy, regulars on the show. We're going to be playing some Dead by Daylight in the bowels of the murder megaplex." His head was little more than a ghostly floating specter as the camera picked it up and made him look a little ghoulish in the dim light. The screen became black as the game started. I watched as they rolled into the selection menu, the game divvying up teams and assigning the killer. I let my mind wander a bit as I monitored the stream. The boys were enjoying themselves, yelling and screaming whenever the killer would sneak up on them. They had played 3 games, Jeremy taking the killer role twice, when someone in the comments started trying to get my attention. This was pretty typical behavior. Most of these guys were attention whores, and they wanted to make the highlight reel at the end of the video where we showed great comments or funny moments. This guy, despite the ridicule he was getting from the others in the comments section, was not letting up, and that drew my attention. "There's a shadow behind Kyle," he said. Then a few minutes later, "Seriously, someone is sneaking up behind Kyle." 5 seconds after that, he posted, "Someone get Kyle's attention. Someone is coming up behind him." I looked at the camera feed, but saw nothing besides Kyle's face lit by the ghostly light of the movie screen. The game was the kind that favored a very muted color palette, and it had bathed the theater in a murky tone. I looked back to chat and saw that the guy was still yelling about someone coming up behind Kyle, telling him to watch out. I looked back at the feed and nearly fell out of my chair as a momentary flash of lightning in the game lit up the whole theater. I had seen someone poised behind him for a bare second, a black-clad figure in a long, ratty coat that I remembered all too well. I keyed up Kyle's mic and told him to watch out, but he didn't move. Instead, he just continued to look at the screen with that same frozen look of concentration he'd been wearing all night. Kyle had always had this intense look when he gamed, his expression somewhere between concentration and catatonia. I could see the silhouette of the man behind him, but it, too, was stationary and unmoving. When his feed cut out abruptly, I realized he'd been frozen for about 5 minutes. I looked out into the theater and could see Kyle still sitting there, head bent a little. His character was standing still. Ralph strolled by with the Reaper and killed him, dropping him with an easy swipe of his sickle. "Oh, tough break, Kyle. You hit a lag spike or something?" Kyle said nothing. I glanced out at the theater Ralph was in and saw that he was alone in the murky blackness. Ditto for Jeremy, and ditto for Dale. I assumed that the figure was still in the theater with Kyle, so maybe I had time to warn the others. It occurred to me that this might all be an elaborate prank, but surely they would have told me if it were, right? Otherwise, I might call the cops, which would draw attention to our stream and cause us to have to leave. I keyed up Ralph's mic so the others wouldn't hear me. "Ralph, we've got a problem." "What's up, homie?" Ralph asked, and I could hear the theater speakers booming in the background. "Something's going on. There's someone in the theater with Kyle, and now he won't respond. He hasn't moved his character, and I can't raise him on the headset. I think something's happened to him, but I need you to tell me if this is some kind of prank." Ralph was quiet for a second before chuckling kind of weirdly. "I don't have the slightest idea what you're talking about, homie, but if you're trying to run a prank here, it's not funny. It's creepy enough in this theater all by itself. I don't need to think about some creeper roaming around in the dark. Look, I'm telling you, this looks like..." But then I looked out into his theater and I felt my next words stolen from me. Someone was standing in the aisle a few feet from Ralph's seat. Someone who was holding a crowbar that was dripping wetly. "Ralph, behind you!" I yelled, but by the time he turned, it was too late. Ralph cringed against the seat in front of him as the hooded figure lunged with the upraised tool. I watched as his controller spilled to the floor, the assailant smashing him across the face with the dripping instrument. He rode him to the ground, Ralph looking dazed as he fell. The tool came up with each swing in a theatrical, horror movie fashion, sending out sprays of blood that coated the seats. The figure rose once he'd finished, and I could almost feel his eyes on me as he looked up to the projection booth. I backstepped to the computer and keyed up the other 2 mics. "Dale, Jeremy, you guys need to come to the projection booth right now." "Why?" Dale asked. Someone just killed Ralph." "What?" Jeremy asked, and I could hear him standing up. "He beat him to death with a crowbar. We need to get the hell out of here right now." "Agreed. Dale, you and I should head for the emergency exit in the theater while..." But there was a sound like someone tripping over carpet. I heard Jeremy's mic go dead, and a quick look showed me his feet being dragged behind a row of seats. I heard wind passing by Dale's mic as he ran for the exit. I could hear him hyperventilating a little, and as I watched, I could see him running for the glowing exit signs. I could also see the figure step out in front of him from a row of seats and bash him with the crowbar, knocking him sideways into the other row of seats. I backed away from the window then, starting to hyperventilate myself. This was crazy. How could they have gotten Dale and Jeremy at the same time? Was there more than one killer? How had they gotten this far? Had they been waiting for us this whole time? I shook myself out of my daze and decided that I needed to go. I looked at the equipment on the table and decided to leave it pretty quick. It would slow me down, and who really cared if the police found it? I was getting ready to report this the second I got outside anyway. I glanced through the projection hole one last time, checking to see if anyone was in the theater, and finding no one below. That was when something slammed into the projection room door, and I fell on my ass. I scuttled back against the wall, eyes glued to the door that was being violently rammed from the other side. Whatever it was slammed into the door a few more times before it rattled the handle and found it locked. I was suddenly glad I'd remembered to lock it, and I patted my pocket for my phone. I decided to go ahead and call the police. They could book me for trespassing right after they saved my life. It wasn't until I'd patted myself down a half a dozen times that I remembered I'd left it on the table next to the laptop. That was also when I realized that the banging had stopped. I crept on hands and knees towards the desk, praying the phone hadn't fallen. The silence was deafening in the wake of the explosive pounding. I kept glancing at the door as I crawled, expecting that any minute the door would burst open. I was afraid to look over the edge of the table, fumbling in vain as I tried to find my phone. That's when I heard a truly chilling noise, the last noise I ever expected to hear. The sound of keys being thrust into the lock, and the door being opened with a simple turn of the knob. I sat huddled beneath the table as a hooded figure wandered into the office. He was tall, his face hidden under the blackness of that dark covering, and his feet echoed off the floor as he stalked towards me. I tried to back up further. My back smashed the metal legs of the table as I came up short. I felt my legs tremble as I shook, and I closed my eyes as I expected to die very messily. I opened them again when I heard the laughter from the doorway as Ralph and Dale came through the door with their cameras in hand. "Oh man, we got you so good," Ralph laughed. "He bought it hook, line, and sinker," said Dale. "Another classic prank." I couldn't believe it. This had all been some stupid prank for their channel. I watched as the killer doubled over and started laughing too, his crowbar dropping with a plastic thunk to the ground. When the hood came down, I saw it was Titus, our sometimes roadie, when we took our shows on the road. Jeremy leaned in the doorway, laughing uproariously, as the others high-fived and congratulated themselves on scaring me half to death. I wanted to be mad, but I found myself laughing out of pure nervous relief. You jerks," I breathed, accepting Titus's offered hand. "You really scared the crap out of me." I slapped Titus on the shoulder. "How the hell did you get across 3 theaters in a matter of seconds, anyway?" Titus looked confused at that. I didn't. I snuck into Ralph's theater through the fire door and waited for you to notice me. Then I ran out after you turned away, coming into Dale's theater and catching him as he tried to escape." "I pretended to drag myself behind the seats," Jeremy said. "And Kyle?" Titus was still laughing, but he looked a little confused. "What about him? We didn't even tell him about this prank. You know Kyle's a blabbermouth. He'd have never been able to pull this off." That made me pause for a minute. "Where is Kyle?" I asked, not seeing him and really being concerned about that for the first time. Ralph and Dale looked at each other. "Dunno. No way he's still in that theater." I looked down from the box, and sure enough, Kyle was still in the theater, unmoving and not playing the game. We tried to raise him through the mic again, to no avail, and after thumping on the glass window for a few minutes to get his attention, we decided to go see what was going on with him. The 5 of us came down the stairs and crept toward Kyle's theater. The door creaked ominously as Jeremy pushed it open, and I could see Kyle's head framed by the white screen as he sat upright, staring forward, and I moved inside to go see what was up with him. I came up behind him, pausing as I caught sight of something I hadn't seen before from my high vantage point. I didn't need to touch him to realize why he wasn't going to answer me, and they all drew close as I took a few balky steps back. There was a machete sticking through the back of the chair, pinning him to the seat. When the others saw him, they all started freaking out, talking all at once as we tried to figure out what to do next. Ralph wanted to call the police. Jeremy wanted to get the hell out of the theater and then call the police. Dale just wanted to be out of the theater. We all kept trying to talk over each other, our terror rising as we kept stepping on each other's conversation. That's why it took so long to realize that Titus was gone. We looked around for him, but no one could remember if he'd come into the theater with us. The last time anyone had seen him was in the projection booth. That seemed to be the deciding factor for Dale. He had his phone out, dialing 911 before anyone could say anything about it. Jeremy slapped it out of his hand, though, and the 2 of them stared at each other in surprise. Jeremy seemed as surprised by what he had done as Dale was to have his phone slapped away. It bounced under a nearby seat, and the 2 of them just stood silently for a few seconds before Dale asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. "I don't want to be involved with this. If you call the cops, I'm going to lose my job." "Screw your job," Dale yelled. "At least one person is dead." "Let's just leave first. We can get outside and then call them. You 2 can stay and say that this was your idea, and I can—" Dale was dropping to his hands and knees, looking for his phone under the seat. "Man, that's some cowardly shit. One of our friends is dead, and you're worried about losing your job. Man, I can't believe I ever... His words were cut off, though, when someone drug him under the seat, and he started screaming. We scattered as Dale screamed, all three of us flying like quail, as we tried to put as much distance between ourselves and the killer as possible. I had my phone out as I left the theater, dialing the number for emergency services as I went. I vaulted the concession counter and hid behind it as the line buzzed and buzzed. I sat there shaking, the smell of old popcorn and aged soda in my nose as I waited for someone to pick up. 911, what is your emergency? I sighed, glad to hear someone outside of this place. I told them I was at the Megaplex and that I needed the police there immediately. I told them how we had used Jeremy's keys to get inside, how we were planning to set up a stream and play games in the creepy theater, how they had pulled a prank on me that had started all of this. I told her about Kyle and Titus and about all my friends who were probably being murdered right now that we had split up. And I told her once again that I needed help. I felt the tears roll down my face as I started to cry. She assured me that help was on the way, but that I needed to stay on the line. That was when someone kicked the counter from the other side, and I practically threw my phone in surprise. I could hear the lady on the other end calling my name, seeing if I was there, but my phone had landed against the opposite counter, and my attention was dominated by a hulking figure standing over me. The bar came up to his waist. The guy was nearly 7.5 feet tall, and dressed in cast-off clothes and a long coat with a hood. He was holding the crowbar, his sightless face looking down at me, and then he smashed the crowbar against the glass, and I felt drops of something splatter across my face. I wiped them off and saw the red streaks on my fingers, realizing that his crowbar was splattered with blood. For a moment, we just stared at each other, his featureless face glowering at me. I couldn't see him glowering, but I could feel it as he glowered at me in disapproval. I had come into his den, his hunting ground, and now I was his prey. He turned, taking a step towards the opening that would let him behind the counter, and I weighed my escape options. I could try to vault the counter, but it seemed likely that he would catch me before I got to the door. If I sat right there, I'd get killed in short order, but if I sprinted for the area behind the concession stand, where the door was we'd come through, he might not be able to catch me in time. This seemed like my best course of action. He would likely still get me before I got to the door, but it was my only hope of escaping. The choice, however, was made for me. He had just stepped into the space between the counter and the back when the blue lights framed him up, and he looked at the big glass door in front of the building. He broke and ran for the back of the Megaplex then, back towards the theaters, back towards whatever nest he had made for himself back there. The cops found me behind the counter a few minutes later. A search of the Megaplex turned up the rest of my friends, or what was left of them at least. Each of them had been killed. They had been stabbed or bludgeoned or just strangled with the bare hands of that imposing shade. I was the only survivor, it seemed, and the police were very interested in getting my statement. That's why I'm here in this interrogation room, filling out this report. They haven't talked about criminal charges yet. I think they figure I've suffered enough. What they want is my complete report on the happenings of this evening. You can be certain that I'll never forget the events of tonight's stream. The last stream of my career, very likely. Sounds like the snow is still coming down. That's okay, though. We can stay warm by the fire with all these great stories. Diaries are often a window into people's thoughts, a way to see their innermost desires and maybe their daily activities. But let's hope next time you come across a diary, you don't find one like this. You'd hate to have a mad writer's journal. Travis pulled up in front of the old cabin, ready to prepare everything for the coming weekend. It would be nice to have the rental property again. It had been closed for the last 8 months as the police combed over every square foot for evidence. Travis grimaced as he thought of it, cursing his luck at being out all that cash. He'd had a funny feeling about that writer type, but he'd needed the money. It had been a slow season, and he needed to make it up before the snows came. Who would have known that the snows would come early that year? As he pulled up, Travis saw that the place looked completely untouched, except for the police tape that crisscrossed the door. As he broke the tape and the door came open, he breathed in the dust of the last few months. Travis had been here only a few times since the investigation had begun. They had been searching the woods mostly, searching for the man who had been on the New York Times bestseller list for about 6 months a few years ago. He had disappeared sometime during the blizzard, and no one had any idea where he was. Travis didn't much care if some city boy had wandered off during a storm, but he hoped it wouldn't be something he'd have to tell people. It would hurt his chances of renting the cabin again. Travis grimaced as he saw the place, realizing that this would be more work than he thought. The front door was supposed to open onto the front room with a fireplace and some soft furniture. There was a kitchenette, quartered off by a kitchen island, and a ladder that led up to the loft room that overlooked it. It was all very cozy and very rustic, and the tourists loved its country charm, as it said on his review page. It seemed that the crazy writer had transformed it into a disaster area. The carpets were stained, and by the way his boots crunched on them, Travis just knew he was going to have to rip it all out. The couch was flipped over, and one of the chairs was smashed to pieces. Some of those pieces were shoved into the fireplace, along with a hefty bag of trash and various other things. The fireplace was black with soot, the rockwork charred with ash, and by the smell, Travis thought the guy might have been cooking something in it. The kitchen was mostly okay. The refrigerator would need to be replaced, and the sink was full of sludge, but he thought the cabinets were intact until he got closer. That was when Travis noticed that every surface on the dark wood had weird runes scribbled into it, and would probably need to be ripped out. The ladder was still there, and as he climbed up to the loft, a smell met him before he got to the room. The walls were scribbled with the same runes and symbols, and the bed was stripped of its bedding and pillow top. That likely explained what had gone into the fireplace, but it didn't explain why this guy had rubbed his excrement all over the bed. The mattress in the frame reeked, and Travis roared in rage as he realized that there was no saving that rustic bed frame, something that had run him about $4,000. He kicked the end table, the drawer popping in, only to slide slowly back out again. He shoved it, angry that it wouldn't go in, but realized something was stuck behind it. Dragging the drawer out, he found a manila envelope that someone had sealed up neatly and stuck in the back of the dresser drawer. He blinked, unsure of what it was. How had the cops not found this? It wasn't even hidden very well, and he would have surely seen it if it had been here before the writer arrived. It could only have been left by his latest tenant, and as he split the seal, he was curious about what he would find inside. Inside was a manuscript of about 120 pages and a salt and pepper mead binder. The front of the manuscript bore the same weird symbols as the cabinets and the walls, and to Travis, they looked like a weird combination of hieroglyphs and Nordic runes. Travis had a little more experience with runes. He'd hung around with some of the Odinists for the 12 months he'd been a guest of Stragview Prison, but the hieroglyphs were only a guess from the mummy movies he'd seen. The journal, however, seemed to be written in English at the start. Before he opened it, he decided to go out on the porch and sit on the swing, wanting to be away from the smell of the cabin. The first page was easy enough to read, the writing clean and clear. November 28th, day 1 of writing. Can't believe I got this cabin for so cheap. Couldn't even get a motel in town for this price. It's the perfect place to start my next book, and I'm excited. I brought my typewriter, the only real way to ply your craft, and I've set up a desk upstairs. From there, I can look over the forests and the mountains beyond. These sights will surely push me on as I write, and I'm hoping to be mostly done by the end of the week. I told my publicist to watch my social media, and I turned my phone off for the week before leaving it in the car. I want no distractions. November 29th, day 2 of writing. Well, if this isn't a surprise. I woke up this morning to find snow flurries. It's not sticking yet, but there's a weird wind blowing out there that makes me glad I brought my coat just in case. I brought the typewriter out onto the porch and was quite happy to be distracted by the falling snow. Even so, I wrote about 20 pages before I turned in for the night. Chapters 1 through 3 are sitting on the nightstand, and I'm pleased as punch about them. Ramsey Reed has found his latest case and has begun to chase the tail of this particular cat burglar. It'll be a great sequel to Ramsey Reed's first adventure. I sat on the porch till dark, listening to the moths as they smacked against the porch light. It's peaceful out here. the quiet night disturbed only by the sound of the snow coming down. I will truly be sad to leave this cabin, as weird as that sounds. I love my little apartment in the city, but out here, amongst the hills and the snow, it's truly spectacular. It's a little strange, though, as far up the mountain as I am, I felt like someone was watching me. Sitting on the porch, drinking tea and enjoying the quiet as I decompress, I could swear I saw something out in the woods around the cabin. It's just a shape, nothing definite, but being out here gives me hills have eyes vibes. I don't own a gun. I hadn't even thought to bring my knife, and when I went inside, I was very happy for the chain on the door. It looked thick and sturdy, and I hoped I wouldn't need it. November 30th, day 3 of writing. I finished another 20 pages today, and I'm glad I brought enough food for the week because I woke up to another surprise. I found the yard covered in snow, my car almost completely covered. The wind had blown it against the door deep enough to keep it from opening without a hard push. There must have been a real blizzard last night, which I seem to have slept through because the snow is easily 3 feet deep as I write this. I'm sitting in the living room watching it come down and wondering how long the power will last. It's holding firm, but I've seen it flicker a few times. I went ahead and had the steaks I'd been saving for Sunday, but if push comes to shove, I can put the rest of the meat in the snow, I guess. Despite the weather, I'm still impressed with how the book is coming. Ramsey has found the trail of his cat burglar, a true thief who's about to escalate in a big way, and soon their confrontation will be at hand. Speaking of confrontations, I saw someone again through the window. It's still in the woods, but it's clearer tonight. The moon came out, turning the falling snow into a field of diamonds, and I can see him at the edge of the woods, just watching the house. No, not the house, not really. He's definitely watching me. When I stare at him, I can feel him staring back. I thought about pulling the ladder up behind me tonight, but opted not to. I was not ready to give in to my paranoia, and the chains on the front door are pretty thick. December 1st, day 4 of writing. I only managed 15 pages today, the snow distracting me as it came down. I'm glad today that I brought the typewriter and this journal, because the power went out about noon. I found a grate under the sink in the kitchen that I can stick in the fireplace, and a big stack of wood out under a tarp out back, so I guess I won't starve. There's no way I can make it out to my little car. It's almost completely buried in the snow now. The road was hard enough to get up without snow, but now that the roads are icy, I'd be in for nothing but a quick trip to the ground if I tried. I had to move upstairs again. Writing in the living room makes me feel like something's watching me. Even during the daytime, I can feel eyes on me. It's very disconcerting. It's not as bad upstairs, but I had to move away from the windows, too. Something has noticed me in here, and I don't much care for the interest. I'll be pulling up the ladder tonight. Silly or not, I don't like the feeling of being watched. Travis sipped his coffee as he read the journal, more and more certain that it had been the writer's with each page. He did remember getting a refund from the power company for the power being knocked out up here, but it had only been for a couple of days, a week tops. The poor guy had probably had to cook over a fireplace till Monday or Tuesday of that next week, poor baby, and shiver under the extra blankets in the closet that night. Nothing to whine about, Travis thought. Trapped in a well-stocked cabin with a working fireplace and an amazing view sounded like a fine vacation to him. He flipped to the next page and read on. December 2nd, day 5 of writing. I cooked my first meal over the fireplace this morning. Fortunately, the owner left a cast-iron skillet that I used to make eggs and bacon, and some toast that's a little crispier than I strictly like. I put all the meat in the freezer. It's been thawing slowly, but I think it'll keep it fresh for a few days, given the weather outside. I only wrote a little today, 5 pages at best. I'm disappointed at the effort, but it was too bloody cold out there. I spent most of the day shivering under a thick blanket, jacket on, the cold eating at my bones. I stoked the fire, but it didn't seem enough. I had it blazing by bedtime, and that's how I caught my first good look at that creature that's been stalking me. I decided to get a good fire going and put the screen up, maybe building up some heat so I don't shiver my teeth out all night. I woke up a lot last night as I pulled the blanket around me, and it hurt my writing today. After getting it going, I put a bunch of logs on and turned to climb the ladder when I saw a face in the glass. It was pale, too pale to be a person, and it was pressed against the window like a kid on a bus. It had long, greasy hair, its eyes the color of molten pennies. It stared at me, and as it saw me looking at it, it grinned, showing a mouthful of gravel-gray teeth. I screamed and almost fell off the ladder as I scrambled up it and yanked it up behind me. I sat on the floor after I got there, the firelight making shadows jump and jitter on the wall. In those lights, I could still see his face as he smooshed it against the glass. The thing could see me too. I knew it, and I pulled the covers off the bed and brought them around me as I sat watching it. As I write this, I've been looking up to peek at it, but my eyes are getting kind of heavy. I don't know how much longer I'll be awake to keep watch. Travis saw a long smear of graphite on the page and figured he lost the fight not long after. The tale was troubling, but Travis felt sure that his door would hold against if anyone tried to come in on the guy. He'd built those doors to hold up against bears when the cabin was empty. The doors were still there, too, so unless the writer had been dumb enough to let the thing in, he'd be safe until the snow melted. The snow had actually melted some the following Tuesday, before dumping another 5 feet on them over the coming weeks. The writer could have left by Wednesday at the least, so where had he gone? Travis read on, becoming intrigued by the mystery here. December 3rd. Can't really call this a day of writing. I didn't write a single page, not so much as a sentence. He was gone when I woke up, but I moved all the wood into the kitchen just the same. The whole time I could feel something watching me from the tree line, and I wished I had a gun. It's weird to write that sentence, but much less accept it as a statement of fact. I've always been staunchly opposed to guns, never so much as fired one, but I think I might be ready to rethink my stance after this. As I transferred the wood inside, I found something on the wood around the back door that made me think he'd been hanging around the house longer than just last night. The wood is marked with swirls and runes. The runes don't look like anything I've seen in fantasy books. These runes are angry, pagan-looking. I'm not even sure what he carved them with. The way they've been done makes me think he dug them out with his fingernails. It took up a lot of time inspecting them, and it distracted me from the feeling of being watched. The more I looked at them, the more they seemed to move and squirm. The story they told was something I couldn't decipher, but I could almost believe that, given enough time, I could have made some sense of them. The next thing I knew, the sun was setting, and I'd been looking at the wood for 8 hours. He came back again that night. I stoked the fire, but I scrambled into the loft without looking at the window. As I write, I can see him peeking in. His pale face is hard to hide, and I know he knows I can see him. I can almost believe that he's naked. I know he can't be. It's freezing out there, but I can see his bare shoulders and hands with no gloves on them. They're sitting against the window like pale starfish, and the fingers are just as pale as the moon. I'm wrapped in the blanket again, and the shivering makes my writing so uneven. What if this storm never ends? What if I'm stuck here all winter? What if I'm stuck here forever? December 4th, day 6 of writing. I managed 2 pages today, but I don't know how much more I'll be able to do. The story just won't come anymore. When I sit down and write it, I feel like such a fraud. It makes it difficult to string the words together. Am I even the same man who wrote Ramsey Reed's story? I'm devoid of ideas. I'm a hack. I can't keep writing this story. Better to turn it over to someone else. I don't deserve to write this story. I shouldn't have come here. This was a mistake. Frost talked about the bleakness of the forest and the harsh beauty of nature, but I thought it would help inspire me to continue this series. Instead, it's just shown me what a hopeless fake I am. Fake. Fake. Freak. 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 He had filled the rest of the page with the word fake or some misspelling of it. Travis could see that some of them had nearly gone through the page. By the date, he had written this Monday night, so tomorrow's entry, if there was one, would probably be him leaving and heading back to Kashmir. He'd feel like a real horse's ass as the weather rattled down and be on his way, though clearly that hadn't happened if the cops were still looking for him. Travis turned the page, and what he read made him blink. There was indeed another entry, but not what he had expected. December 5th. The snow is back and in force. It's blowing a proper blizzard out there, and all the windows are covered in frost. It does stop me from seeing the man, but it's also a little scary. I'm wondering when this will end, but I still can't see any end in sight. The snow's up to the door now, completely covering the porch. I can look through the front window and only see the top of the glass pane. I'm running out of food. I was supposed to leave this morning, placed clean, key under the mat, but I can't get out either door. I could climb out the loft window, but I'd still have to walk down the mountain. That seems like a bad idea in this blizzard. Luckily, I moved the wood inside, 'cause I'd have to tunnel out in order to get it now. The fire's burning, keeping some of the chill out, but it does little to turn the frost away from the windows. Despite the cold, he came back tonight. I could see him pressing his face against the top of the window, and I'm hiding under the covers as I write. It's all been a bit too much today. Travis furrowed his brow. That was wrong. The storm had ended Sunday, and the snow had been mostly melted by Tuesday morning. The temperature had been in the low 40s, unseasonably warm for the time of year, and the snow had stayed away until next week. There should have been no snow to hold him up. What was he talking about? Travis flipped to the next page, but the next 3 days were little more than footnotes. Until the 9th, that was. December 6th. Burned the last of the wood. Food running low. Cold creeping in. December 7th. So cold. Food running low. Burned the bedspread and the pillow top. It made a lot of smoke, but not much heat. I have another day's worth of food at best. The snow has to end, or I'll die up here. December 8th. Food is gone. Wood's gone. Smashed up the chair and burned it. No hope. No hope. December 9th. This may be my last testament, or my suicide note, or whatever you want to call it. I don't have much of a choice. I have to leave and try to walk down the mountain. I'm out of food, I'm out of fuel, and I'm out of options. I have to walk down the mountain to get some help. It's about a 5-mile hike through the snow, and I've taken all the provisions I can find. Water, the last of the food, which is 2 granola bars and a pack of trail mix, tube of toothpaste for emergencies, and those are my only supplies. I got my jacket and 2 pairs of pants on. If I don't come back, I hope someone finds this and looks for me come spring. Travis expected that would be the end, but there was more. A surprising amount of more. As he flipped through the pages, he could see that almost the whole book was full, though some of it were those weird scribbles he'd seen on the wall. The writer had apparently lived through the hike and come back to tell the tale, but Travis wasn't sure it was just him who had come back. The writing from here on was rougher, less neat, and he thought maybe something had happened on that hike. As he read on, he discovered that he was right. December something. I don't know how long I was in the snow, but somehow I'm back in the cabin. I woke up in the loft, lying on the floor without my backpack. I didn't dream the descent from the mountain. I can still remember it so vividly. I set out at morning, crunching through the snow, sinking up to my knees as I tried not to break a leg. I should have made town by afternoon, but the forest just went on and on. The snow was high enough that I dropped from the loft window and didn't get hurt, and it seemed to go on forever as I tried to make headway. As the sun set, I became aware that I was going to have to make camp out here, and I increased my plotting in hopes that I'd get there quicker. That was when I fell. Suddenly the snow was moving under me, and I was falling off the mountain in a jumble of arms and legs. I went above and then under, like a wave trying to hang on to its rider, and I blacked out before I came to a stop. I didn't expect I would ever wake up, just freeze to death like Jack Torrance at the end of The Shining, but I was not so fortunate. Someone found me. I woke up under the moonlight, and he was standing over me. He wasn't pale like I had thought. His skin was like ice, though still very much malleable. He was naked, as I had thought, but he lacked definition. He had no genitals, no nipples, no tone to his body or features other than his face. He was like a mannequin made of ice, and when he leaned down, I thought he was going to kill me. When he touched my forehead, and a lance of cold agony shot through me, I wished he had. I blacked out again, and when I woke up, I was here. It's getting dark, but I'm not cold anymore. I guess I'll just get some rest. First day of writing. I woke up today and felt inspired. The house is still snowbound, so I took out my typewriter and started writing again. I tried to write Ramsey's story, as I'd done before, but the words don't seem important. There's a new story now, something different. It's about something older, something that lives in the woods, something that only comes with the snow. I started writing, but the words didn't look right. The words aren't right. The words aren't his words. I threw the typewriter into the snow and started writing by hand. Whatever that thing did when it touched me, it taught me how to write to him and tell the story that he wanted me to. It taught me how to write those weird scribbles that are over the back door, and now I can properly tell his story. Second day of writing. I'll use the old words here, just in case I happen to lose these new words. I wrote 50 pages last night. By hand. I haven't written that much by hand since high school, when Mr. Kimbler insisted that all our essays and dissertations be done by hand. If you speak the speak of the bard, then you must speak from the hand, not from the tapping of so many keys, he would so often say. I get it now. The human language, the language I once wrote in, cannot convey this story. People do not have words for the places and things he has shown me. The old words tell about things we cannot dream of, places and creatures and ideas so foreign that a sea slug at the bottom of the ocean might as well try to understand a car and how it works. I've been writing all day, writing all night, and I don't even think I'm a quarter of the way done. This may be the greatest work of my life. This may be the thing that ultimately destroys me. Third day of writing. I talked to the creature last night. I was writing, the pages really stacking up, when I heard someone knock at the door. It was the thing, that featureless thing that met me in the snow. He had a deer slung over one shoulder, a huge and bleeding buck, and when he came in, he threw it on the floor and just looked at me. I guess he didn't see any of the fear or uncertainty he'd seen before, because he asked me how my work was proceeding. He didn't say it like that, not necessarily, but I understood what he meant, and I nodded, showing him the pages. He said the deer was for me, and I realized that I hadn't eaten anything in 2 days. As I ate the deer, raw and oozing, he told me about him, the master we now both serve. I suppose I serve him. I seem to be serving him with every scrape of my pen, and to say otherwise would be false. He told me of his time, he told me of his home, and he told me of his enemies. I asked who he was, but he never gave me a name, and when he laughed, it sounded like glaciers colliding. "You know him, Harold. He's chosen you. taken you as his chronicler, and if you don't know him by now, then he will surely destroy you before you can. We talked all night, and he left as the sun rose. I wrote this journal entry before my writing started for the day. I haven't slept since I came back. Haven't felt like I needed to. That should scare me, but it's honestly invigorating. My writing is becoming less coherent, at least where these words are concerned. I don't know how I feel about that. My words have always been what I have, my talent, and to lose them is scary. What I have found seems better, but it scares me too. It raw, primal, and the words are like the ones I saw on the back door before I knew them. I kind of want to go see what they are, but the house is almost completely under the snow now. I write in darkness, and yet I see. This house is like a tomb, but I think perhaps it's also a cocoon. I hope I'm the butterfly, and I might emerge changed. I pray it's not a wasp nest, and I'm a dead bug waiting to be eaten when the eggs hatch. Travis didn't like what he was reading. It sounded like this fellow was losing his mind. He had taken a spill out in the snow and had somehow gotten back home, and now he was slowly going cabin crazy. Travis still couldn't understand why. The day he was talking about had been sunny. The snow hadn't come back until the week after, and if Travis hadn't been visiting relatives in Asheville at the time, he'd have come up here to make sure the place was clean before the cops called to ask about this missing renter. That had been a whole mess, too. The man's editor had called when she hadn't heard from him by Thursday, and the cops had gone to do a well check and found the house destroyed. They had called Travis and started going over everything, but that had been a whole mess, too. The man's editor had called when she hadn't heard from him by Monday of the next week, and the cops had been unable to do a well check because of all the new snow that had started falling. They had gone up after a week of frantic calls in a snowmobile and found the house destroyed. They had called Travis and started going over everything, but that had been the start of this whole endeavor. Now it sounded like the guy had just sat up in his house and wrecked the place, maybe suffering from a concussion or some kind of mental break. Travis turned the page, but it just kept getting rougher. It started to look like charcoal marks, and the guy's new writing style only got sloppier. Travis didn't know who this mystery fellow was, but it sounded like the police might need to know about him. Travis had lived in Kashmir his whole life. Weird stuff was just kind of part and parcel for the town, but this was something else. The mountains had always been a place that Travis could come to get away from the weirdness for a while. They were a place he could hunt and fish and sit on the porch, hike the trails, and just forget about all the crazy stuff he lived with in town. As he read on, he started to feel the tickly feeling the writer was talking about. Suddenly, Travis didn't want to be on the mountain anymore. 4-day writing. He came back again. He brought meat, and I ate. We talked about the creature. And he read over my notes. He liked them, said I did good. He told me that he was once like me, person trapped in the snow until someone like him came and helped. He is Brogan, one of his helpers. I will be Brogan, he says, but I don't know if I believe. Made 70 pages, but there's problem. Am running out of paper. Pen stopped working today, but I held it over fire and got the ink to work again. Finding it difficult to make words today for journal, though my hands write the older words with much speed. These words feel stupid and heavy as I make them. The pen must be saved, so I will stop for today. Day. Burned pages of old story in fire. Old story not good. New story better. Paper gone. Am writing on wall now. Wall will be new book now. Hymn book. Words hurt head. Need right here, but hard. Watched pages burn. Felt nice to see. Pages old way. New story is new way. Day 3. It makes me spinny to write this, but I had to get some of myself again. I think it's been 3 days since I wrote, but I can't sure. Sometime in last few days, I've changed. I'm different. I'm like Brogan when I see him in woods. I'm smooth. Definition gone. I'm trying to get myself together, but I don't think I can. Must write stories. Must stop old words. Last entry. I'm in the bathroom, and I don't know how long door will hold. Earlier today, cut myself on pen as I wrote. I just did it again, and it clears my head some. Something came last night. It saw what I done and liked it. I'm bleeding pretty bad from my other hand, but I need to keep enough wits to write this down. He rode a horse and carried a sword. His eyes are fire. His skin green metal. Brogan say he is him. Green man. That now I go with them. I don't think I can say stop. I want go, but I want not. I will hide this somewhere for someone to find. If find, take to police. Let know what happened. I go with green. Travis jumped as he caught sight of something in his peripheral vision. He'd been so enthralled by the last few entries that the thing had damn near snuck up on him. Now it stood halfway between the woods and the house like a kid playing red light, green light. It was human-sized, naked and pale as the late afternoon sun beat down on it. Its hair wasn't straggly like the one the writer had described, cut into a short red flat top that was going wild quickly. His face was somewhere between doubt and a grin, like someone who's been caught but isn't sure whether you're going to scream or invite them in. He looked familiar somehow, like someone he'd passed on the street but never bothered to talk to. And as the minutes ticked by, Travis tried to remember who he was. All at once, he got it. He'd never met the guy in person, only talked to him on the phone a few times, but the police had shown him a picture from a recent speaking engagement at one of the colleges in the area. He looked different in his fresh flat top and charcoal suit, but the look on his face was an exact match. It was a look that said he was surprised to be here, but pleasantly so, and he was just waiting for someone to throw him out. It was the writer, or what was left of him. Before Travis could call to him, he backed away slowly, each step seeming like a cartoon skit. Before he stepped back into the woods, he tipped Travis a wink, and even from the porch, that wink was icy. It said that it was okay. They'd meet some other time. He'd see him again. It was just a matter of time, after all. Travis wasted no time in getting in his truck and leaving down the mountain. He would drop this journal off to the cops so they could start searching the woods again. He might stop at Roy Miller's Realty and tell him how he wanted this cabin on the market yesterday so he never had to come up here again. Hell, he might even stop at that new clinic in town, Dr. Winter's Forgetful Something, and see if they had any appointments available. Travis never wanted to think about what he read again, and he would never set foot in that cabin again for the rest of his life. The next story hits a little close to home, especially with all the windy weather going on outside. So, when it's time to put on some warm socks, make sure yours are still in attendance. After all, sounds like there's something out there taking socks. I shouldn't have cared so much. They were just socks after all. But it was becoming such a problem. We moved into our house about 3 months ago, our first real house. I honestly thought this was going to be a fresh start for my wife, my daughter, and I. We've been bumping around from place to place since Lisa was born, and we'd lived in a new home every year since she was a year old. It had nothing to do with our landlords or rowdy neighbors or paranormal happenings, as is often the case in these kind of stories. Her mother and I simply kept getting better jobs, which required us to move from one side of town to the other for work. That kind of moving made it hard for Lisa to make any friends or feel comfortable in any place she knew, since she knew she just had to pack up and leave again soon. After 8 years of moving around and never fully unpacking, my wife and I gained some level of job stability. I was a junior VP with the company I worked at, and my wife had become a manager at the store where she worked. This meant the money was steady, the job was consistent. We decided it was time for something a little more permanent. We started house hunting right away, and after a few weeks, we stumbled across what we thought was our dream home. It was less than 30 minutes from both my office and her store, a bus ride away from school for our daughter, positioned out of town so as not to deal with the constant noise of the big city, and a big backyard with plenty of room for our growing family. As I look back on it now, I never would have expected what came next. We'd been in the house for less than a week when I first started noticing the socks were missing. "Honey, have you seen my black dress socks?" I was standing in the laundry room, looking into the dryer like I expected my missing sock to just appear out of thin air. My wife walked onto our back porch to see what I was talking about, her bathrobe replaced with a work uniform. I should have left for work 10 minutes ago. I would miss my carpool at this rate. But there I stood with one sock on and one bare foot. I had searched under, around, and on top of the dryer for the missing sock, and had finally started looking into the empty dryer like an utter fool. My wife said she hadn't seen it, but wondered if I'd seen the fluffy pink socks she liked to wear to work. "I'm missing the left one," she said good-naturedly, but I could tell she wasn't pleased about it. We both shrugged it off at the time. We had just moved in, and there were still boxes to unpack. We figured our socks had just gotten lost in the shuffle. As the first month went on, however, and the boxes slowly became less and less, we found it off-putting that we hadn't seen any of our missing socks. Quite the contrary. I was now missing 12 socks out of 15 pairs that I owned. This wasn't such a huge deal for me. I owned 15 pairs of business dress socks that went with my suits, and I could easily match them together. My wife, on the other hand, was fuming because she was missing some of the cute socks she liked to wear to work. Not just our socks. Lisa's socks were missing too. Not to mention that Lisa hadn't been sleeping well since we moved into the new house. Since the first night, she'd been woken up in the wee hours of the morning by a strange noise outside her window. She never saw what made the noise. It never poked a grisly mop over the windowsill to scare her, but she said it sounded like fingernails scratching along the side of the house. I went and looked, too, and there were definitely scratch marks on the bricks outside her window. They were going up towards the kitchen, and maybe towards the laundry room. I put it off at the time, and made a note to trim the tree branches the next time I was doing yard work. We had quite a few large oaks in the backyard, and their branches did hang pretty low to the ground. Other than the socks and the noise, Lisa loved her new house. She had friends over to play in the big backyard, and had a huge room for all her toys and games, a bathroom all to herself. She would always follow every puffy-eyed morning up with, "But I still love the house, Dad. Please don't make us move," no matter how many times I assured her that this was our house now, and we weren't going anywhere. Sitting in the bedroom now with all of them clustered around me, I don't know if I still feel that way or not. About a month ago, the activity started to escalate. It was the holiday rush for the company I worked for. October, November, and December are big advertising months. I was working late, later than usual these days, to meet my deadline. I had been dozing at my desk, and I jumped one evening as the phone rang, not even realize what time it was. I looked at the clock and gasped when I realized it was almost 8:30. That would be Maggie, I thought, calling to make sure I was okay. Lisa would be in bed already, and Maggie would call to see if she needed to wait up for me or go to bed. Her store was experiencing the same holiday blitz as mine, and she would most likely relish the idea of rolling into unconsciousness until the alarm went off again. I caught the phone on the third ring. Hello? David, please, I need you to come home now. It was Maggie, but she sounded funny. Not funny ha-ha, but funny scared. She was whispering into the phone, and in the background I could hear someone crying. I guessed that it must be Lisa. The two were likely in the bedroom, the farthest room in the house from anything, with the door locked and the windows drawn. Maggie, what's going on? There's something on the back porch, she whispered. Something big. David, I need you to come home. I think it might be a prowler. Okay, Maggie, I'm on my way. You two just sit tight, okay? I had already grabbed my briefcase and my coat and was heading out the door. I made the 23-minute drive in 10 minutes, and I was lucky I didn't see a single police officer. As I pulled into the front yard, I popped the trunk and took out one of the golf clubs I'd had in there since my last golfing trip. It was a big old sturdy driver, and I felt sure that it would be a force to be reckoned with, unless the prowler had a gun, of course. I moved around the side of the house, keeping my back against the wall as I went, and when I got to the back porch, I listened for the sound of something moving around. I'd put a heavy deadbolt on the door leading from the house to the back porch, and I was pretty confident that it was still on. As I listened, I heard something, and I tensed as I cranked my senses up to 11. It was a scuttling sound, like claws on asphalt, but it was also a weird sort of gloopy sound that was barely audible over the scraping and the clawing feet. I relaxed a bit, thinking it was probably just a raccoon or a possum, and stepped around the corner as I threw open the door and brandished the club. I expected to find an animal, a startled animal that would hiss and run away, but I was unprepared for what awaited me as I threw open the screen door and stepped out on the back porch. Nothing. There was nothing on my back porch, except for the storage boxes we kept out there and the washer and dryer. I looked around, moving the washer and dryer to see if anything had clawed its way behind it, but there was nothing to be found except some scrape marks on the tile. I decided there was a hole somewhere that a critter was getting in through. Upon further investigation, I discovered that the silver tube that hooked the dryer to the outflow was knocked off. I secured it and locked the screen door and went around to the front door to let my wife know that it was just a raccoon or something. She was far from satisfied with this explanation. It sounded way bigger than a raccoon, David. I'm sure I heard something out there. There are noises that Lisa keeps hearing, too. What if it's some pervert who's stealing our socks? Socks? Is that something that people really got off on, I asked. She wasn't amused. I'm serious, David. I want you to do something about this. So I did. I called a contractor and had him come look at the back porch. He couldn't find any way that something could be coming in, but he said he'd pest seal all the exit holes and suggested that I call a pest control company to put out some repellent and keep the critters away. I thought maybe this would stop the problem, but it only seemed to escalate it. Socks began missing at an alarming rate. 3 pairs in one night, 4 pairs in one night. By the end of the month, we'd be through 4 packs of dress socks. Maggie was putting a lot of pressure on me to solve this problem. I was getting angry. My work was beginning to suffer for lack of sleep and lack of focus. 2 days ago, I finally had enough. When I came home to find my sleep-deprived wife dozing on the back porch, all her laundry done during the day now, and having to sit with it to keep it safe, I knew something had to give. I took a week off work, citing stress at home and a need for rest. I staked out the back porch. I had purchased a jumbo-sized packing box, big enough for me to sit in and stake out the back porch to catch whatever was doing this. I was no longer convinced it was a critter, and the fact that everything was reset back the way I had left it in the morning told me it was a devious individual with a lot of experience at this particular pastime. I set up the box and put some snacks, some water bottles, and a gun that I had bought just for the occasion in one corner. I made myself comfortable, as comfortable as you can in a huge box, I guess, and settled in for the night with my phone out and my energy shots close at hand. I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up, it was to the sound of scrabbly claws again. I peeked out from the box, expecting to see an animal or maybe a weird little man with a sack and a mask like in the manga I had read as a kid. But I did not expect to find what I found out there. My cell phone light shook as the creature came into focus. It was amorphous, like an oozing potato, with 6 long human-like arms coming out of its body. Each arm ended in a hand, and each hand ended in a finger. And each of the 6 fingers each had a little hand that were tipped with long, dirty nails. This was the sound I'd been hearing. The creature scuttling along on its long, dirty nails as it clicked across the back porch. It didn't see me right away. It had its head in the dryer. When it came out, I could see a smooth and bloated head with no neck and a snarl of long, greasy black hair that looked like a wig. It held one of my daughter's socks in a 7th and 8th pair of hands. As it looked at it through watery black eyes, it reached into its body with the other hand and pulled out something. It pulled out what looked like a baby. It looked like an amorphous potato baby that squalled in a soft little gloopy way and waved feebly with its 8 stumpy arms. The creature took the sock and stretched the neck of it out before it placed the squalling thing inside it. The baby stopped glooping at once, making some watery burbles as the creature slid it back into its flesh. And as the creature turned to go, it finally caught sight of me. I saw it scamper towards the back of the dryer, somehow condensing itself to slip in and out again. As it pushed itself into that pipe, it finally saw my flashlight, and I saw the skinned back, 2 large jaws that dominated the front of its face. It looked like a weird Halloween mask, the ones that are a little too uncanny. It opened its mouth and made a sound like an angry river rushing up to swallow me. I shot it then. I rattled off 3 panicked shots before I could stop myself, and it stopped in its tracks and looked startled. I don't know if I hit it. I don't even know if my bullets could kill it, but I was so scared at that moment that I did the only thing my lizard brain determined was the right course of action. I ran. I flipped out of the box and ran, slamming the door behind me and throwing the bolt as something large and angry thundered against the other side. My wife was there then, pale and unsure, wanting to know what had happened. I turned her around and grabbed Lisa as she came sleepily up the hall. I pulled them all in the direction of the bedroom and locked the door behind us, pushing the chest of drawers in front of it. The police have come and gone now. I called 911 before I started writing this, but they couldn't find anything on the back porch. The officers figured that maybe a bear wandered up or something. They're supposed to be hibernating, but it happens sometimes. Their only real question was how it had gotten out without dropping a single drop of blood after being shot. The back porch is a disaster. It certainly wasn't worried about keeping a low profile this time. The police gave me the number to animal control and told me to call in the morning so they could have a look for the wounded bear. I'm not calling animal control, though. In the morning, we're going to pack up everything dear to us and just get the hell out of here. If that thing can fit through the hole in the laundry room, I have no idea how small it can squeeze. Since the police left, I can hear something outside the windows. I can hear those dirty fingernails as they scrape along the brick walls of the house. Could it squeeze through the crack under the front door? Could it come in through a sewer pipe? My family drifted off into a shallow sleep, but I'm sitting here on the bed, gun by my knee, just listening for the sounds. It stopped scraping its claws about 5 minutes ago. I don't know if that should be comforting or not. I wish I'd just let it keep the socks. Whew, it's really kicking up out there. It's a good thing we've got a warm fire today, and a lot of great stories for you and I to just relax and listen to. I don't know about you guys, but I, myself, consider myself a comic collector. I also buy and sell them, but that's neither here nor there. Sometimes, when you come across something rare and valuable, you get a little excited about it. But when you're out there collecting rare things, make sure you know what you're getting your hands on. You wouldn't want to have a situation where you get your own issue 237. I have acquired Khazar the Amazing, issue 237 to be exact, and it scares the crap out of me. I'm a collector of rare comics. Well, not really a collector, I guess. I never keep them for very long, you see. I prefer to sell the comics for big bucks. I buy them from Goodwill and garage sales and estate sales, anywhere I can pick them up cheap, really. I'm in it for the profit, pure and simple. But today, I may have found something that I wasn't quite prepared for. Briarcliff Estates was having an estate sale, and I knew that there would be some interesting pieces there. Mr. Briar had died at the ripe old age of 103 and was said to be a notorious pack rat. His wife and son had died years ago, both under mysterious circumstances, and Briarcliff had gained an air of mystery ever since. It was said that his house was full of things, everything from antiques and collectibles to, well, downright garbage, and I wanted to have a look. The sale was even grander than I had expected. There were halls cluttered with antique furniture, shelves full of old books, antique kitchen appliances, Persian rugs, strange art, odd articles from around the world. All the trash had been cleared away, and all the items for sale had been tagged and were on display. A large crowd had gathered, and I was more than a little interested in some of the books for my shop. The auction seemed like a total waste of time, though, right up until the last lot. The antique furniture went first, then the old cars from the garage, then the rugs and the appliances, and the strange antiquities. Some of them were pretty grisly. Apparently, Mr. Briar had been a world traveler in his youth. He had collected things from Africa, Russia, Germany, China, all of them with an eye towards the occult. I actually found myself bidding on a wand made of pure ivory, something my Harry Potter fans would have doubtlessly paid a lot of money for. But a stuffy old man in the front row shelled out about $100,000 for it, and I sat down and shut up after that. He had long white hair and an imposing beard that hung down past the waist of his immaculate gray suit. He was a jarring comparison to the toad-faced man with the all-black oiled hair on his head that sat on the far side of the hall. They seemed to know each other, know and hate each other. They had several hard looks for each other as they held their complicated bidding war, and their battles bled over into the books as well. They snapped up most of the books, old moldering things with hard-to-pronounce names, and my bids were mostly shouted over as the two dueled for the remaining tomes. Most everyone else had gone, seeing that these two meant to have the lot. So, when the last lot came up, and turned out to be a box of comics, I immediately threw out a bid of $25. I hadn't expected to see any comics here, my focus being on the antique books, but this seemed to be the only thing that these two weirdos didn't want. The bid went once, went twice, and then sold as the two glared at each other from across the room. I took my box of dusty old comics and scuttled off before either of them could realize that I had been there. I didn't realize what I had until I got home. I took them to my office and set to work. First a shower, then a change of clothes. Old comics can be finicky, and I like to be comfy when I appraise them. Then the gloves came on, a nice set of reusable rubber ones, and I put on a hairnet, too. Can't be too careful with old comics. After I was set, I opened the box and had a look. I was not immediately impressed. Mr. Briar, it appeared, had a thing for old Hanna-Barbera comics. There were some Yogi Bears, about 10 Huckleberry Hounds, some Tom and Jerry's, and a few wacky racer comics that I'd never even heard of. I set those aside. Hanna-Barbera comics never retail very high, unless you have some of the rarer pieces, that is. They were all in bags, though, and looked to be in pretty good shape, so I could at least get asking price for them. Next came some old Johnny Quest comics, and they also went to the side. Then I pulled out some old detective comics that looked to be from the early 40s run. They were bagged and looked to be in great shape. I set those on the desk by the computer. Looked like my purchase wouldn't be entirely in vain. There were some other things in there, some well-loved action comics, a few Batman issues from the late 60s, and a single issue of a comic series that I had never heard of. Sitting at the bottom of the box in a plastic sleeve that looked to be caked with dust and, I don't know, maybe soda, I guess, was a copy of Khazar the Amazing, issue 237. I had never heard of Kazar the Amazing, and he appeared to be some sort of magician detective or something. I was also unfamiliar with Keystone Comics, and decided to go do some research. As I brought it over to the computer, though, I felt a strong urge to drop it and just walk away. The comic felt weird, even through the gloves, and the bag was tacky in a way that soda usually wasn't. I don't know how to describe it. It was like the comic didn't want to be held. I shrugged it off at the time, but I can feel it now as it sits on the nightstand beside my computer. It doesn't want me to touch it. I looked up Kazar and found that it was part of a debut series from Keystone Comics. Kazar was in fact the only comic series they had put out, and it had a very limited run. Less than 500 issues of each comic were ever made, and they were extremely rare and not often seen at auction. Issue 237 was actually the last issue ever printed before Keystone Comics burned to the ground in 1975. The fire was supposedly investigated and ruled as an accident, despite 4 people having perished in the blaze. Chuck Landstar, the owner, and the writer of Kazar, his assistant, Mike Dre, and the illustrators who worked on the comic, Jug and Dale Trebolo, had all been killed in the fire. The series had never seen the light of day again. Apparently this issue had less than the usual amount on the run. Even in its ratty condition, it was worth over $1,000. Cha-ching. $25 for $1,000 seemed like a great deal to me, and who knew what kind of bidding war I could get on this thing. I gingerly removed it from the bag and threw it away, as no customer would want it in that state. The comic itself was ragged, the spine bent, some of the page corners damaged or missing. The pages themselves looked pretty good. Old, but good, until I got to a spot near the back. Towards the end, Kazar appears to be casting some sort of spell to summon an ancient deity. He stood in the middle of the circle, laid with etchings and stone runes, and I could see quite a few bodies laying around as well. Some of them seemed intricate and embellished enough to make me think they might be the main characters he'd sacrificed. But I knew nothing of the series, so I could only speculate. There was a dark-haired woman in a slinky dress that barely contained her assets, a blonde guy with a loincloth and a skull helmet, a young boy in a red cloak, and another, less buxom redhead that seemed to have died holding hands with the kid. They were all laid out in a circle, and their deaths seemed to have been unkind. Kazar was kneeling, resplendent in his yellow and green robes, as he made his request before the towering form on the horned helm. Its eyes were coals beneath the visor, and its green armor was stained with ancient blood. It sat atop a bone-white horse, steam curling from its nostrils, as it brandished a sword at Kazar that looked big enough to cut him in half. Kazar was making his request, but the words had been smudged. The figure on the horse didn't sit right with me. Even through the page, I could feel his regard. It was like he was looking at me, judging me, weighing my worth. I closed the comic. No sense getting spooked by some old comic, I told myself with a laugh. I took some pictures next, showing the damage, and put it into a new protective bag. I uploaded the pictures to Comic Squire, the service I use to sell comics, and sat back to wait. I pulled some of the other comics I had piled up towards me and started looking them over so I could post them as well. One of the detective comics was worth about $40. That was cool. Another was worth about $30. Excellent. And I heard a ding from my computer and looked up to see that Kazar had an opening bid of $500. I typed a message to the buyer, someone named Nilrim, informing him that I was firm on $800, and went back to the other comics. 2 of the detectives were so much hamster cage liner, but I saved them aside so I could put them with the bulk lot. 2 more were worth about $30, and I had just started looking up the 7th when my computer dinged again. I looked up to see that the same buyer was offering $800, the price I listed it for, and I nodded and turned back to my work. The bid would sit on the site for an hour, allowing others to bid if they wanted, but I figured this guy would get it, and I would be $800 the richer. I'd barely gotten the 7th comic out of the bag when my computer dinged again. A new bid had come in for $1,000. I checked the buyer, and this time it was a new guy named Morgul. He was offering an extra $50 for overnight shipping. That made me raise an eyebrow, but I suppose he wanted to make sure it arrived undamaged. After all, this was a rare comic, and I sent him a message accepting his offer should he win. I had barely sent the message when Nilrim got back to me with $1,200. This went on for a few hours, and as the bids went up, the bidders began to message me. That was when things got bizarre. From Morgul. Dearest seller, the user Nilrim is trying to purchase your wares under false pretense. He is my rival and merely wants to own the comic so that I cannot. I implore you to award the sale to me and ship with all haste. His wording was strange, but it was nothing compared to what his rival was about to send me. From Nilrim. I must ask that you not sell this piece to Morgul. He wants it not for scholarly endowments, but for his power, and it will bring him much. I must have this item so that it can be sealed away from those who might use it for ill. Thank you. I furrowed my brow at this one. Sealed away from those that might use it for ill. It was a damn comic book. I had barely finished reading the message when I saw that Morgul had sent me another message. From Morgul. I see that you have not offered me my preference in this matter. Has Nilrim offered you something more in return for this item? I assure you I will match whatever offer he makes, no matter the cost. That took me by surprise. These guys were clearly serious collectors, or weirdos, and they could likely pay big money for it. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was stay quiet and let these two drive the price up on their own. Simple economics. They wanted it, I had it. Suddenly this ratty comic was looking like a cash cow to me. Even then, I hadn't realized the real value of the piece. I heard the computer ding as a new message from Nilrim came up. Please, I implore you not to be swayed by Morgul's boasting. If he gets the tome, it will be devastating for our world. I implore you to sell it to me. Money is no object. Name your price, and I will pay it. I sucked in air through my teeth, my small pile of potential profits forgotten. This fellow had basically written me a blank check. How much would be too much? He had said that money was no object, but there was always a limit. I looked back at the sale and realized that Nilrim had just placed a bid for $50,000. Morgul quickly countered with 60, and the two went right on sparring as I watched. I pulled up Nilrim's message again, and that was when I realized that his profile had a picture attached. I clicked on it and realized that this was the same guy from the auction today. This picture was of a grandfatherly-looking man, long white hair and beard that was downright Gandalf-esque. He was in profile in the picture, just his head and shoulders, but I was willing to bet it was the same guy. This Morgul character was likely the other man, the one who had looked like a toad and been afflicted with all that greasy black hair. They were just continuing their antics from the auction, and I was surprised they had any money left after all the crap they had bought earlier. Another message from Nilrim came in, and this one had a link at the bottom to a new site. This must end. Morgul must not be allowed to own this spell. See what it has wrought last time it was unleashed upon the world. The link brought up an article about Briarcliff Estate. 4 bodies had been found on the grounds nearly 20 years ago. They had been arrayed in the garden, the photos looking very similar to the one in Khazar, minus the bodies, of course. Those had been replaced with tape outlines, but their placement was undeniable. Briar's wife, teenage daughter, nephew, and the brother that had been killed in what seemed like a cult activity. Briar had immediately been the first one to be suspected, but some combination of money and alibis given out of fear had cleared him. Still, his reputation in the community had been well earned. Had Briar made a deal with that horned demon? Had Briar possibly discovered something that had led him to fill his hallways with junk in an attempt to insulate himself from whatever might come for him? I saw I had a message from Morgul, a message with his final offer. The link in his message was of a Google Maps location. It was my address. His last message was much less formal and much less pleasant than the others had been. I'm coming for what's mine. See you soon. I've been sitting in my office writing all this down for the past hour. I've locked the doors and called the police, but they don't seem to be taking this very seriously. The numbers on the bid haven't gone up in an hour, and even though Nilrim had won, I'm afraid he's never going to get what he paid for. I can see someone moving in the yard outside the window, but when I try to call the police, it just rings and rings. I don't know what to do. I can almost feel this comic watching me, even as whatever's outside keeps moving around out there. The sun will be going down soon. I wonder if they'll find my body here or by some circle in a garden somewhere. One more story for you. Then I'm afraid I'm going to have to turn you out into the frigid winter weather. I know it's a little bit outside the season to think about swimming or camping, but let's hear a story about some kids in the woods, maybe doing something unadvisable, and let's find out what's in the blue. I opened the mailbox and started shifting the mail around to see what today's bunch of crap was. Bill, credit card offer. My hand froze as I looked at the envelope, my jaw quivering a little as I read the address on the front and the name of the sender. This hadn't happened in years, not since I'd left college, but I'd felt safe enough to settle somewhere, hoping that the letters had stopped. It had been 3 years since she'd written, but it made me feel like I was a teenager again, fearing that anyone but me would find those letters. From Catherine Mansley to Justin Mansley. Dear brother, it's been so long. You should come see me in the blue. Love, Catherine. I tore the letter up and went back inside, trying not to notice how the paper had made my fingers feel clammy and moist. The envelope, too, had been the same way, moist and difficult to hold. It was like wet paper that had dried badly, but it was always that way. When Catherine sent me letters, they were always like that. I had kept them at first, hiding them so no one would find them, but I burned them now, not wanting them anywhere near me. I picked up the phone to call Daniel, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried to call my uncle, but Uncle Mike was hoping I had seen Daniel. He said he'd been missing for a week now, and everyone was getting worried. I can hear him calling me now as I sit on the floor with my knees against my chest, trying not to hyperventilate. But I know it's useless. That feeling is the closest I can come to drowning, the closest I can come to understanding why Catherine writes these letters. Daniel, Carter, Clint, Henry, they're all gone now. I'm the last one that Catherine hasn't got. When we were kids, or early teens, we would all stay at Grandpa's cabin over the summer. Grandpa was long dead, Grandma too, but the cabin was always called such. My mom and dad would usually come up first to get it ready, and I loved the time before my cousins got there, the times I could just enjoy the cabin. I haven't been back in years, not since we went back for Clint, but I can still remember the cabin. It was more of a lodge than a cabin, and Dad claimed that Grandpa's dad, our great-grandpa, had built it by hand. It was made from the huge old trees in the area, and it had a big area downstairs with 4 rooms above it. The rooms were easily as big as hotel rooms, the Motel 6 kind, and they held our family and the families of my cousins easily. Dad had a brother, Uncle Mike, and a sister, Aunt Claire, and both of them had 2 kids. Catherine was the only girl in the family, other than Aunt Claire, and the youngest. That meant she tried extra hard to keep up with her older cousins, and it often led her to trouble. The time she fell out of a tree and broke her arm, the time she'd bruised her legs and butt jumping her bike over a 15-foot drop, the time she'd nearly drowned at Carfer's Pond, were all times she was trying to keep up with us. We were merciless, too, giving her no quarter, and it must have been miserable for her. We loved to hike and swim and spend time in the cabin, but the thing we all looked forward to seeing the most when we came out here was the blue. The blue was a hole in the woods, more like a pit than anything, with water inside that was perfectly blue, like the stuff inside the jar where the barber keeps his combs. It went 30 feet into the earth, the precipice sheer and easy to stumble into if you weren't paying attention. The water inside was so blue that it hurt your eyes if you looked at it for too long, and it always looked artificial to me. Someone had hung a bridge over it, a rickety thing that swung across on ropes, and my cousins and I thought it was great fun to go and tempt fate by bouncing on it and making it sway. Thinking about that now makes me downright shudder, but all kids think they're immortal. I was 12 when it happened, but it could have happened before then easily. We'd been at the cabin a week, swimming and fishing and generally enjoying our time in the woods, when Clint said he wanted to go see the blue today. He said it quietly because if he had said it any louder, his mom or my mom would have heard, and that would have been the end of it. All the adults knew about the blue and had forbidden us to go anywhere near it. Dad had told us stories about playing on that bridge when he and Uncle Mike were kids, but Aunt Claire had always been too scared to go on that rickety old thing. I think my dad knew that we were going to go out to the blue, probably expected it, and never expressly forbid us to go there, unlike my mom. He knew that forbidding it would just make it more enticing, and if he let us get it out of our systems, the blue would become boring, all on its own. I don't think he believed something tragic would happen, but if he had, he might have kept a closer eye on us. We told our mothers we were going on a hike, Uncle Mike, Uncle Dale, and Dad having gone fishing that morning, and they said that was fine, but to be back by lunchtime. We made our way out as quietly as possible, thinking ourselves clever for not letting Catherine hear us, but no sooner had we jumped off the back porch than here she came with a "wait for me." Clint grumbled that we should just run off without her, but that was when my mom poked her head out and told us not to forget Cat. Catherine seemed pretty pleased with herself as she followed us out of the yard, and as we hiked towards the blue, she realized where we were going. "We can't go there," she said, looking scandalous. "Mommy said it was off limits." "Well, Mommy isn't here," said Daniel, "so if you don't want to come, then turn around and go back." Catherine seemed to think about it, but must have decided it was too far to walk back on her own. We were about 2 miles into the woods, and despite her desire to follow us everywhere, Catherine was kind of a scaredy cat. She didn't like being by herself, and it usually led to her getting hurt when she tried to follow us into dangerous situations. She still followed us, but suddenly she was a safe distance away as we made our way towards the blue. When the trees parted and the edges of the pit opened up, we knew we had arrived. "There it is," Clint breathed, the lip coming into view not long after. "So cool." We had seen it a dozen times, but it was always awe-inspiring. The hole was like something punched by a meteor, the edges jagged and uneven. Maybe there was a meteor at the bottom. Maybe it was what made the water so blue, but we had never seen it. Well, not yet. We were only really interested in the bridge that day and cared nothing for the natural beauty. We spent the first few minutes just leaning over the edge and spitting into the water below. We couldn't see when it hit, but we knew it had. If the side had crumbled, we'd have all gone in. Then this story might have been very different. "Let's go on the bridge," one of them said. I think it was Clint, but could have been any of them. It was definitely Carter who agreed, but we all wanted to go. The bridge was what we lived for, the thrill we came back for, and the second my hands touched the ropes of that swinging death trap, I felt the adrenaline begin to pump within me. The bridge was in disrepair from the first time we found it, and it had only gotten worse over the years. It was missing a few boards, the ropes frayed and peeling, and we should have known it was only a matter of time before there was a problem. When we got to the bridge, all of us crowding onto it as we usually did, Henry moved to the front and began swinging it from side to side. The ropes creaked as we all laughed and held on. Henry was quite a bit larger than most of us, and when he rocked the bridge, he really rocked the bridge. It swayed wide over the gap, and we all laughed and joked as we swayed along with it. We'd been cheating death for a couple of minutes when we realized that someone was missing. We looked back towards the lip of the pit and saw Catherine hunkered in the woods. She was miserable, not liking the sight of us trying to throw ourselves into the blue, and didn't seem to want any part of it. We joked and picked at her, but I wish now that I had seen the fear in her eyes and thought better of what we were doing. I should have been a better big brother on that day. "Come on, Cat," Clint said. "No way," Catherine said, grabbing one of the trees like we might try to pull her onto the bridge. "Don't be a scaredy cat," Clint sing-songed, repeating the phrase scaredy cat, again and again as the rest of us picked it up. I didn't pick it up till the last, but I chanted it right along with the rest of them. Catherine was clearly on the verge of tears, but she still had her pride. She stomped over to the bridge, as indignant as anyone could be at 6, but as she came to the edge, she started to look unsure again. Her hands shook as she reached for the ropes, and when Henry stepped out of the way, she walked hesitantly onto the rickety boards of the bridge. Henry closed off her retreat, and she stepped closer to our group as she tried her best not to cry. "All right, Henry, let's get some big swings in this time," Clint trumpeted. Henry seemed all too willing to oblige, and soon the bridge was rocking farther than I'd ever seen it rock before. It was swinging over the blue like a pendulum, and even I was afraid that we might go in. It was pivoting back and forth, the ropes groaning like a ship's mast in a high wind, and I wondered for a moment what it would be like to fall into that blue water. You could only really tread water for so long before you went under, and I wondered how long that would be. Would anyone get back with help before you drowned? I didn't see when Catherine fell off the bridge, but when Henry yelled out a moment later, I looked over and saw her when she hit the blue. She didn't splash, the water just stayed put, and she came up thrashing as she tried to get her head above the crystal blue water. The water must have been thick because she was really struggling to make headway in it. She was calling for help with big, gasping breaths. The bridge had stopped moving, all 5 of us looking down into the chasm and knowing that we were in trouble. We'd been playing where we shouldn't. We had been being stupid, and now someone had gotten hurt. "We've got to go get help," Daniel yelled, and his words were like a starter pistol. I ran for the cabin to try to get help, Daniel and Carter coming with me. I prayed Catherine could tread water while we ran the 20 or so minutes back to the cabin, but I knew that Catherine wasn't a strong swimmer. I didn't expect she would still be treading water by the time we got back, but I prayed to God that she would be. Mom, Aunt Claire, and Aunt Liz were at the table when we ran in, drinking tea and laughing, but they jumped up when we told them what had happened. Mom came running when she heard, grabbing a rope and running along behind us as we went back. My dad and uncle still weren't back from fishing, but Aunt Liz said that she would call emergency services to hopefully get someone down there. The run back took a little longer, all of us winded from the sprint to the cabin, but Catherine had only been in the water for 45 minutes by the time we got back. That wasn't so long, I thought. She could be fine. It turned out it was 45 minutes too long, though. Clint said that she'd gone under about 5 minutes after we'd left, and she hadn't come back up. My mom tied the rope off to a tree, but it was too short to make it down into the blue. She went back for another rope, my aunt staying with us, and by the time she got back, she had emergency services in tow. They brought long ropes and divers, and soon they were in the blue, trying to find her. The diver who went in said the blue was miles deep, and the water was like trying to swim in jello. They went as deep as they dared, but they never found Catherine. My dad and uncles came back from fishing to find my mother inconsolable, and Catherine presumed dead. They didn't have the heart to punish us for what had happened, and all of us said it had been a terrible accident. We left out the part where we'd been rocking the bridge, and they decided that Catherine must have lost her balance and fallen in. They shouted a little that they had told us to stay away from the blue, but they could see how shaken up we were by what had happened. They thought we had been punished enough, but it appeared that something else disagreed. We never went back to Grandpa's cabin again. It held bad memories for the three of us, and I don't think any of Dad's siblings went back either. None of my cousins went there willingly again. It held terrible memories for all of us, it seemed, and I think they knew something dark was waiting for us to come back. The first letter showed up 2 weeks after Catherine's funeral. The 2 weeks after we buried my sister were a really bad time for me. I was sad about what had happened to Catherine, but I was also unbelievably riddled with guilt over it. I felt that I had every right to be guilty. I'd played a part in what had happened, but I didn't think I'd been the biggest part. Looking back, my cousins were really the ones that had pushed her to get on the bridge, but I hadn't stood up and tried to protect her either. I'd failed in my duties as a big brother, and she had paid the price. My parents had been talking about back-to-school shopping, something they seemed unwilling to do, and my mother was trying to guilt my father into getting it done. They were both distraught over the loss of Catherine, but my mother had always been a bit of a realist when it came to things. My sister was dead, but I would still have to go to school whether I wanted to or not, and I would need things to begin school with. While they were arguing about it, Mom told me to go get the mail, see if the circular had come in. I think she wanted coupons out of it, but I can't really remember. I would find it hard to remember much about that day when I looked back, except for the letter. I went to the mailbox and found that there was a circular in there. There were also 2 bills, a couple of condolence cards, and a letter in a strange envelope. The envelope felt moist, the paper seeming damp and moldy, and I didn't like to touch it. I started to sandwich it between the condolence cards, and that's when I noticed it had my name on it. From Catherine to Justin Mansley. I felt the other pieces of mail slip from my fingers when I read the name. It couldn't be. Catherine was dead, dragged into the blue by whatever lay below, and there was no way that this letter could be from her. I thought it might be a trick, maybe one of my cousins, but they had all seemed as guilty about what happened to Catherine as I was. Clint hid it behind a constant stream of humor, but he still clearly felt like he needed to hide what he'd done. Like me, he realized that he could get in trouble if they knew that he'd been goofing around, and I didn't think he'd be stupid enough to try to pull something like this. I opened the strange envelope. I didn't want to. I wanted to throw it away, but I had to know what was inside. Even at 12, I knew there was no way it could be from Catherine. Dead people didn't send letters to the living, but I still had to know what was going on. The letter was brief. All of Catherine's letters have been brief. It's your fault. You should be the one in the blue. I just stood there for a moment, looking at the letter. I started to rip it up, thinking again that this was a cruel joke, but something stopped me. It isn't something I can really explain, but tearing that paper felt like tearing pages out of the Bible. It felt fundamentally wrong, and I ended up stuffing it in my pocket instead, as I collected up the mail that I had dropped on the pavement. I couldn't destroy it, but I didn't want my parents to find it either. What would they say if they saw it? Would they know what I'd done? I couldn't risk that. I was in enough turmoil over my sister's death without my parents blaming me for it. I came in and dropped off the mail, sneaking up to my room as I hid the letter in a box of baseball cards under my bed. It wouldn't be the only one soon enough. Over the next 2 months, I got 2 more letters, each on the same day of the month. After the second one, coming about 2 weeks after school started, I started checking the mail every day to make sure the letters didn't get picked up by my parents. I hid them in the same box, each of them reading similar to the one before it. I'm lonely. I miss you. It's your fault. Come to the blue. Come to the blue. Come to the blue. It was October, the leaves already a vibrant orange in the front yard, when Clint called me after I received my third letter. "Are you doing this?" he asked, sounding angry and scared. Sounded like he was shaking something in the background, paper or something, and I asked what he was talking about. "These letters. Carter and I have each gotten 3. If this is you, then you need to stop. We all feel bad about what happened to Catherine, me especially, but this is going to get us in trouble. If one of our parents found those letters, then we could be in serious trouble for what we did. Your sister is gone, man. I'm sorry for it, but this isn't going to bring her back." I knew what he was talking about without having to be told. I told him I'd been receiving them too, and I bet Henry and Daniel had been getting them as well. I still didn't think they were from Catherine. There was no way for dead people to write you letters, but somebody clearly knew what we had done in the woods. Clint said that was impossible. We had been the only ones in the woods that day, or at least the only ones around the blue when Catherine had fallen in. He said it had to be one of us, and before he hung up, he was going to call Daniel to see if he was the one playing bad jokes. He called me back 20 minutes later and said they were just as freaked out as he was. He says he's been dreaming about the blue, and he knows that Henry has too. Henry's talking about the blue a lot these days, and Daniel is scared he's going to tell somebody what really happened. I hadn't thought of that either, but I suppose by then I thought it might be what we deserved. The letters kept coming on the same day of every month, and I realized that it was the same day that Catherine had gone into the blue. We all received our letters on the anniversary of her fall, and as Christmas came around, we all started to worry about Henry. Henry had always been a big boy, looking like a high schooler, even though he was only a year younger than Daniel. But when he came to our house for Christmas, he looked like he'd lost 30 pounds. It also looked like he might be pulling out his hair. He was twitchy, quiet, nothing like the boisterous boy we had seen a few months ago. Daniel told us that when he talked, it was about the blue. He said he dreamed about it, drew pictures of it, and in the pictures, Catherine was floating in it. Henry and Clint had been the last ones to see her alive in all that blue, but in the pictures, she was waving at them from the water. He says in his dreams, she comes out of the blue and tries to get him to jump in. She told him that it's nice down there, it's cool and wonderful, that he would really enjoy it if he were to come join her. He keeps talking about joining her, but I don't know how he would. Dad told Mom that we were never going back to that cabin, not after what happened. They're all really afraid that one of us will fall off that bridge if we went back, Daniel told us as we sat around the kids' table in the den. Henry sat at the table with us, but he did little more than move his fork around in his mashed potatoes, not really eating anything. A couple of months later, my aunt and uncle put Henry in a psychiatric facility. Dad told us he was sick, but Daniel said he'd started having night terrors, and he almost completely stopped eating. He couldn't go to school. He wouldn't play. It was like he just shut down completely. Daniel was afraid to sleep in the same room with him, and he really hoped that whatever this place was they had taken Henry to, that they could fix him. A month after that, Henry broke out of that facility and was never seen again. No one was quite sure how he had gotten out without being seen, but Henry was gone. Everything in the room was exactly the way it had been the night before, including the restraints that were still buckled in the same way they had been when the orderly put him to bed. The police thought for sure that they would find him walking along the road or something, maybe in the woods around the place, but they never did. Uncle Mike and Aunt Liz were devastated, but the four of us were pretty sure we knew where Henry was. They'd never find him, just like they never found Catherine. We were all pretty sure he was in the blue. The facility they put him in was about 30 miles from Grandpa's cabin, but we were still certain that that's where he was. When I got my letter that month, all my questions were answered. Henry came to join me in the Blue. You should come and see him. He's much better now. Daniel and Clint called me later that day, and I told them I'd gotten the same news. What are we going to do? Clint asked. I didn't have an answer. Carter went next, though it took him 2 years to do it. Carter was about 2 years younger than Clint, the youngest of the cousins besides Catherine, and he held out only because he and Clint were so close. I don't think Clint's parents ever had any inkling of what was going on with their son, but by Thanksgiving, he was looking the same way Henry had. He was barely eating, and only then because Clint coaxed him. Clint had changed a lot since that summer when we lost Catherine. He had softened a little, and I think he had realized that life was a little more fleeting than he had believed. He said Carter wasn't sleeping, was having nightmares about the Blue, and told Clint that Henry was in the dreams too now. Carter was smarter than the rest of us, not that that was saying much, but I think it helped him put off the bad feelings and get through it for a while. Unlike Henry, Carter just looked tired all the time, and when he came to my 14th birthday party that year, the bags under his eyes looked like bruises. It's not as bad as it looks, he told me with a faint smile. My parents sent me to a doctor to get some meds that help. Well, not really help, but they let me sleep. They make it harder to get out of the dreams, though. I asked him about the dreams, and despite Clint telling me not to make him think about them, Carter said he didn't mind. Daniel and I sat close, like students listening to a lecture, and Carter reeled a bit as he thought about them, not seeming sure how to begin. I'm standing on the bridge. It's nighttime. It's always nighttime in the dreams, and I'm looking down into the Blue. It's... He blinked really fast for a few seconds and shook his head before going on. It's glowing in the dreams. It's always glowing. As I stand and look down, Catherine and Henry come up out of the water and wave at me. They tell me to jump. They tell me to join them. They tell me how great it is down there. As they tell me, I kinda wanna jump. His eyes shut for a count of 5 before he jerks awake with a start. I want to go to them. There's no dreams in the Blue, no nightmares or letters or anything. It's just peaceful. He leaned over onto Clint and started snoring, and Clint accepted his weight gratefully. Carter nearly made it to my 15th birthday party, and a lot of that was due to Clint. This whole thing brought us all closer together, and we called each other often. Daniel actually came to live with us for a while, his parents having trouble coping with Henry's disappearance. Aunt Liz was eventually put into the same facility that Henry had escaped from after she tried to overdose on sleeping pills, and Uncle Mike soon moved in with us too. He and Daniel looked sad most of the time, but I think they enjoyed having us close. Daniel had started having the dreams a lot more often, but he was 15 and starting high school, and he had other things to occupy his mind. If there was anyone who could have used our help, it was Clint. Clint had started high school too. He and Daniel were a year older than me, but he missed a lot of days while he tried to take care of Carter. Carter was losing his mind at an alarming rate, and Clint confided that he had started strapping him into bed at night. I caught him sleepwalking to the front door, and he fights me when I try to get him back to bed. I don't know how my mom and dad haven't noticed yet, but I may have to tell them soon. He's like a zombie, and I don't know how he makes it through school every day. A week before my 15th birthday, Aunt Claire called to tell us that Carter and Clint had gone missing. They both disappeared in the middle of the night, she said tearfully. I just don't know what to do. The police have no idea, but I'm hoping that maybe they'd gone to your house for some reason and they were safe. My mom said they hadn't, but she and Dad said they would help her look for them. Clint's bike is gone, too. I told Dale that Indian Scout was a bad idea, but he swore Clint was responsible and that he would just He wouldn't just up and leave without telling us. Daniel and I were eavesdropping, and he said we both knew where he'd gone. After my parents left to join the search party, we piled into Daniel's Jeep and went to Grandpa's cabin, as little as we wanted to. Uncle Mike had left him the Jeep when he got his driver's license, but this would be the longest trip we had ever made in it. Grandpa's cabin was about 2 hours from my house, and despite having left a note, I was sure my mother would be worried sick. The drive seemed to take forever, and when we pulled up in front of the cabin, we found Clint's motorcycle out front, and we knew what we would find. It was dark when we got to the Blue, and Clint was kneeling on the ground as if praying. The dirt beneath his forehead had turned to mud, and he didn't even look up when we approached. "I didn't catch him in time," he said through tears. "I didn't wake up until the sun was nearly up. By then it was too late. He beat me here by minutes. I don't know how. I tried to catch him, but he was already standing on the edge when I got here. I begged him to come back, but he just pitched over and went into the Blue. He was right," he said, pointing. "It glows at night." I hadn't even noticed, but as I looked up, I could see it now. The Blue was glowing like the iridescent moss you sometimes found in caves. And as I looked down, I thought I saw 3 people swimming down there. They were looking up at me, but I leaned away before they could entice me over. "Clint," Daniel said. "Clint, we need to go." "Go?" Clint asked, not seeming sure what he was talking about. "Yeah, we need to go. It's too late for Carter, but your mother's worried sick about you. Aunt Claire thinks you and your brother have been kidnapped. Maybe even that the same people got you who got Henry. Let's go back. Let's go back before something happens." "Something already happened," Clint said, his voice husky. "Carter's gone. Henry's gone. And I'm tired of living with these dreams every night. They aren't going to stop until we all go in. And I'm tired of fighting it." "What are you?" Daniel started, but Clint had stood up and sprinted for the lip of the drop before we could stop him. Daniel made a grab for him, but missed completely. We both stepped after him, trying to catch him, but he was over the edge before we could even process what was happening. He didn't splash when he went in, just like Catherine hadn't, and Daniel and I stood there breathing heavily as we watched the still surface of the Blue. When he didn't surface, we walked back to the cabin with only the moon to guide us and called our parents. Emergency services came in to dive in the Blue again, but Daniel and I just sat there in shock. We've got to get some distance from this," Daniel said. "Maybe if we go where she can't find us, the dreams will stop and we can avoid the same fate as the others did." I asked him if he believed that, and all he could say was it was worth a shot. They sold the cabin after that. My Aunt Claire and Uncle Dale had lost both their kids in one night, and they took it pretty hard. Daniel and I helped each other through the next few years, but when Daniel graduated and said he was taking a job overseas, I could tell that the dreams were starting to get to him. I'd kept my grades up, using the sleepless nights to study, and was eligible for early graduation. I'd been accepted into a college 3 states away, something that broke my mother's heart. Daniel wished me luck. For the next 3 years, we just kind of maintained. The dreams got better with distance, and soon I stopped having them altogether. Daniel told me the same and built a life for himself in South America. After 3 years, I almost forgot about the dreams and the Blue, just chalking it up to something remembered wrong from childhood. And as I got closer and closer to graduation, I couldn't wait to start my new life. Then Aunt Liz died, and Uncle Mike had begged Daniel to come back. Aunt Liz had died of a stroke in her bed, having left the facility years ago. And Uncle Mike was a mess. He had never really gotten over the loss of Henry, and he begged Daniel to come back and help him. Daniel had agreed to come back and help with the funeral preparations, but then he said he had to go back. He invited Uncle Mike to come back with him, saying he could stay with him in South America, but he doubted that he would. It's only for a couple of weeks, a month tops. I'll be fine, he assured me. Now, he was gone too. As I sit on the floor typing this out, I can hear something I haven't in 3 years. The blue is calling again. Catherine is calling again. I don't know how long I can hold out. Sooner or later, I'll go join the rest of them. Sooner or later, I'll return to the blue. The old guilt is still there. It's always been there. I was a fool to think I could run from it. I should have saved myself the trouble and jumped in the night Clint went in. Now, I'm the last. It's only a matter of time before Catherine gets me, too. I think that's gonna do it for our stories today. But I do hope you'll come back tomorrow for more great tales and more great company. Till then, this is Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful day and a warm, spooky evening.